This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hi, everyone. This is Brianna Whitney, host of the True Crime Arizona podcast, and this is yet another update on the zombie hunter case and trial. Here with me today is investigative reporter Morgan Lowe.
Hi there.
So we have a lot to catch up on today, including some updates about what's coming up right around the corner in this case, which we've been waiting to get some answers on. So, Morgan, do you want to bring us up to speed on the latest?
Yeah, the headline is that Judge Suzanne Cohen tentatively scheduled closing arguments for April 5th. Now, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, that is later this week. So this trial is finally starting to wrap up. Finally.
After starting last October.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been such a long time coming.
And we thought let me back up here because this trial is a little different from most. In most trials, it's set in the calendar for 3 months and that's it. This trial, I don't want to say it was shrouded in secrecy, but there were so many documents that were sealed and so much we didn't know that we originally thought it was going to be 6 weeks. And now we are, going into month 7.
Right. Past 6 months, let alone, 6 weeks. I don't think either one of us expected it to go quite this long. We've been listening to so many different people testifying, from doctors, psychologists, to friends, to family. So when the judge listens to closing arguments, what do you believe she's going to be listening for after everything she's learned?
Yeah, it is a challenge for the defense and the prosecutors because your closing arguments are just that. It is your chance to wrap up the case, to put everything and tie it up in a bow. We've got months of testimony, and this is the last thing that you are going to leave with the decider of fact. Normally this is for a jury, but this is going to be the judge. So if you are the defense, your main job is to have the judge walk away believing that Bryan Miller was unaware of what he was doing at the time of the murder or unable to tell if his actions were wrong or not. It's called the McNaughton test. This was the test for not guilty by reason of insanity back in 1992 and early 1993. In 1993, later in the year, the Arizona legislature changed our test for, now it's called guilty but insane. Back then, it was not guilty by reason of insanity. So the legislature changed the test, and now it's actually harder to be deemed not guilty by reason of insanity or guilty but insane. But it goes back to those two prongs. Unaware of what they were doing at the time or unable to tell if their actions were wrong or not. And everything that the defense has brought up has been geared toward making the judge believe that. If you're the prosecutor, you're trying to poke holes in that. You bring witnesses that say, no, he really was aware of what was going on. You bring evidence like the letter, or the plan, they called it, that showed that he was planning what he was doing. So both sides, this is it. This is where, at this point, the judge will decide either guilty or not guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. And then we go into the second part.
And that's crazy. We've talked about it, the fact that the laws that were in existence in the 90s when these crimes happened, when the Canal Murders happened, is what they'll be going off of. So just based on what you said, in theory, that would mean it almost helps him in his defense that it might be easier to get a not guilty by reason of insanity than it would be after that law was changed?
Yeah, certainly. Now, Arizona is a little bit of an outlier with the way we view guilty but insane today. Many other states still go on that two-prong test. So certainly there is more of an opportunity for a defense attorney to make the argument that a client was not guilty by reason of insanity if the crime occurred in 1993 or older. And so, closing arguments, how long do they last? That's anybody's guess. At this point, the judge has said we're going to dedicate a day or maybe 2 days. So
That's not too long. I mean, given the whole scope of the trial, that's pretty quick.
Yeah. I mean, openings were like an hour each. I mean, the openings were done before the lunch break on the first day of trial.
Wow.
That was quick. Closings, probably a little longer, and it will be interesting because there was so much of this rambling testimony. If they're able to really pull this in and present it to the judge who is deciding here what she's going to do.
And so for the past couple weeks, prosecutors have been putting forward rebuttal witnesses in an attempt to counter the case the defense put on over the course of about these, 4 months. The defense has really been on the stand for a while now. Most of these witnesses have been psychologists testifying that they do not believe Bryan Patrick Miller was legally insane at the time of the murders, and then them explaining why they believe that. But in some instances, they actually used Miller's own words taken from interviews he conducted with these psychologists or other doctors. And at other times, they used information they gathered from the people who knew Miller best, his friends, his girlfriends, people who knew him when he was younger. So at this point, there's a psychologist versus psychologist competition going on between the prosecution and the defense. But they also heard testimony from Miller's ex-wife, Amy. Now, we discussed the first 2 days of her testimony during our last podcast episode. We learned a lot during that podcast episode. But then she did testify again for a third day this past week.
Yeah, prosecutors finished up their direct examination of Amy. That is what they started the first 2 days. And then the defense began their cross-exam of her. But let's start with the direct. The prosecution asked Amy more questions about the sex life she had with Bryan, specifically the sadistic nature of that sex life. Amy described how Bryan would pierce her skin with pins during sex, and that her pain appeared to turn him on. She described him choking her and wanting to watch other men have sex with her. Prosecutors also asked her about specific types of pornography Amy said Bryan made her watch, which included people being boiled in water and people being eaten. Amy also testified that she began to become afraid of Bryan toward the end of their marriage. Here is an exchange between the prosecutor and Amy where she describes what happened when she finally decided to leave Bryan.
Were you with a different partner when you left him?
Yes.
Did you feel that it was necessary to have another partner before you left him?
Yes.
Why?
I didn't believe he would stand up to another male in order to hurt me.
Were you worried that he would hurt you if you didn't have a male to protect you?
Yes.
Did that fear play into how you left the defendant?
Yes.
When is the last time that you had contact with him?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
I don't believe he has directly spoken to me since the divorce was finalized.
Would you remind us what year that was?
2006.
Okay, so that was interesting, and we hadn't heard that specific information from Amy before. So, Morgan, why do you think that specifically was important to establish here?
I think this goes back to the beginning sort of picture they're trying to portray of Bryan, and that is that he is different now, and he was different back at this point than he was at the time of the murders. You know, they sort of described him as somebody who was flawed, somebody who is mentally has big problems, but not a threat. And here we have really for the first time somebody who knew him well, somebody who was around him almost 24 hours a day for 10 years, saying that she was afraid of him. She had fear of him, and this was 2006.
Well after the Canal Murders.
Yes. And so I do think that this was effective in showing that he isn't somebody who may have fallen into this psychosis back in 92 and 93, but that is not a danger anymore. And it also, it shows that she was afraid of him because she believed that he could or would do harm. He knew he would do harm. And you go back to that, not guilty by reason of insanity. They have to not know, what they're doing. So, yes, this was a pivotal piece of testimony here. And I do think it was effective. How effective it needs to be, I have no idea.
I also find it interesting just listening to that bite, that he seemed to scare women and seemed to have confidence in asserting dominance over women. But when it came to other men, that's what Amy felt would protect her, that he wouldn't have the courage or confidence to stand up to another man.
Right. And it goes back to that thing with him that he appears and apparently has problem with women.
Right.
And wants to harm them.
And that's been brought up multiple times.
Yeah.
So the defense also got a chance to question Amy. And what struck me about this testimony was that it was a lot of yes or no questions. Not that the prosecution really allowed Amy to expand a whole lot on her answers, but the defense kept it really short. Their job here was to, at best, correct the record the prosecution created, or at least poke some holes in their case. So they asked Amy some questions about Bryan's relationship with his mom, Ellen. Now, they all lived together for a time in Washington, and remember that Ellen's relationship with Bryan is a big reason the defense is claiming that Bryan had mental problems because she was abusive to him as a child. Now, they also asked her whether she thought Bryan believed she enjoyed the sadistic activity in the bedroom, and she said she didn't know if he thought she did. But probably the most impactful part of the testimony was when defense attorney Denise Dees asked Amy about custody disputes she had with Bryan, and specifically why she did not tell the family court judge certain information about Bryan's past.
There was sometimes custody disputes, correct?
Yes.
And you had a chance to be heard in front of the court about why you thought Sarah would live with you and shouldn't live with Bryan, correct?
Objection relevance. What is the relevance?
Because she said that she was scared of Bryan and that she knew of all of this information about people from Washington, but when she's asking the judge for her child, she doesn't say anything about.
All right, I'll allow it.
So you had a chance to be heard in front of the court about who Sarah should live with, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, you didn't say Bryan is a dangerous man, correct?
That is correct.
You didn't tell them Bryan told me about stabbing a girl in Washington, and I think that he could hurt my daughter, correct?
That is correct.
And you never told the judge, I'm scared for my life, and so therefore I don't want my daughter living with him, correct?
That is correct.
And we should note that Sarah is Amy and Bryan's daughter. They share together. That was their only child they share together. Bryan doesn't have any other kids. So, Morgan, what's your biggest takeaway from this piece of testimony and the fact that over and over again, Amy did not reveal these details to a judge when she could have?
Yeah, this is a classic example of a defense attorney impeaching the testimony of a prosecution witness. The defense attorney is saying, you say this and you say that, however, you behaved this way. You had an opportunity to tell a judge that you were living with a serial killer. You had an opportunity to tell a judge that you were afraid for your life and for the life of your daughter, and you didn't say anything. They never asked her, in the movies, they would have said, explain this. Why
Sure.
didn't you? A defense attorney, an attorney on direct or cross-examination never asks open-ended questions. But they just said, you didn't say it. Is that correct? You did not say that. And she said she did not say that. So what this does is it creates a question of credibility in the witness. And that's really been a question with regard to this witness in particular.
For months.
Right, because Bryan apparently told her, confessed to her about attacking other women and she never went to the police until he was arrested. She never came forward with any of this. So according to her, he confessed to all this. But when she had a chance to protect her child or protect herself in front of a judge, she did not say anything. And it's not up for the defense attorney to explain why she didn't say anything. It is only up to the defense attorney to create that question of why. And Denise Dees did that by the book here.
It's interesting, I think, because a lot of times, even in our profession, we hate yes or no questions. We don't want people to answer just yes or no. We want the details. But sometimes there's power in a short answer like that. And I think to your point there, the judge is listening to that, looking at that, and it's doing everything that the defense needed to do to prove the point in the simplest form.
Yes. Yeah. And you know, a question arises here. This is a bench trial. Is this as effective with a judge who you're assuming is looking straight at the facts and less emotional, and maybe the judge's imagination is running less about possibilities? Or would it have been more effective with a jury?
And we'll never know. I mean,
Right.
That's the thing, right? But I wonder that too.
Yeah, the jurors would be sitting there going, wait a second, why didn't she say that? And that may not be germane to the main arguments here, but when you talk about impeaching a witness's credibility, you're creating questions about that witness's motive and reliability, and that really affects jurors. Whether it's going to affect this judge and how much so, you know, that's an open question. But that exchange had to have some impact.
And I've had several people in the last week since we released that last episode with Amy testifying, a lot of people reaching out, interested in this information, interested in the trial, and asking me, okay, so what does happen next? Like, what can we expect on a timeline? And I keep telling people, I wish that we also knew. I mean, this early April date that we've gotten for closing arguments is the closest thing we have gotten to any sort of idea of when this might start to come to an end. But we just don't know how long the judge is going to take to make a decision and come to a verdict.
Yeah, so the defense attorneys are going to make their closings, and then the judge will recess. And the judge will go over all of the facts and everything, and we have no idea how long that's going to take. If it's a jury that's been sequestered or that's been pulled away from their lives, the clock ticks. It is, there's no law that says a verdict needs to come down quickly, but it happens because the jurors, that's all they are doing. This judge may have other cases and may only dedicate a few hours every day to this verdict, or the judge may completely clear the calendar and just think about the verdict before coming up to it. We don't know.
And it's so hard for us to plan around too, and just to our listeners who are wanting to know. I wish we had more of an answer here, but you have to imagine she's going over 7 months of information. That's wild in and of itself. And there's a lot riding on this because, like we've said in previous episodes, there's a chance that if Bryan is found not guilty by reason of insanity, that he goes to some sort of mental institution and could have the possibility of being let go and free after a while, depending on if he were to pass mental health checks. So that's a huge, I guess, aspect of what could happen. On the flip side of this, he also could face the death penalty.
Yeah. And so what happens next is the judge will take in all this information and then apply the facts that she was given in this case to the three potential outcomes. One, which is guilty of murder, and there are certain elements to that crime that need to be met. So are they met? The second one would be not guilty. The defense didn't really put on a not guilty defense here.
Mostly because of his DNA being at the scene, correct?
Yeah, they just chose not to challenge that. Although, that is a possibility. Apparently, that is a possibility. but then the third possibility is the not guilty by reason of insanity. And in that case, again, the judge takes the testimony, the facts that were given, and applies them to that test. And so those are the three outcomes. The judge comes back. At that point, if it's not guilty, it's done. If it's not guilty by reason of insanity, then there are more proceedings to decide what to do with him, because he would, be put into the custody of Department of Corrections, but in a mental hospital. If it is guilty, then it goes into the penalty phase. And the penalty phase is what happens to him. Prosecutors are asking for the death penalty. Does that mean he would automatically get the death penalty? No. There would be another sort of mini trial, the aggravation mitigation part of this trial, where they say these are the elements of the crime that lend themselves toward a death penalty case, a death penalty punishment, or these are the mitigating elements of what happened to him and the crimes that lead it to maybe life in prison, or life in prison without parole, or something to that effect. The judge doesn't have total carte blanche on what to choose here, but it's not going to be 5 years in prison for first-degree murder.
No.
So there are some scenarios that will need to be hashed out, and then the question is, does that phase start up immediately,
right,
or is there a month break? If it's a jury, the jury is in charge of the penalty phase. So it starts up very quickly, because they don't give a jury 2 months off and then bring them back. With the judge there, we don't know. It could go right into the penalty phase, or they could take a break. I know that Judge Cohen has had another trial that she's had to put off.
So she may be motivated to get this done.
Yeah, she's got a busy schedule.
Sure.
We hope to have more information this week. Obviously, we hope to have more information on the day of closings. We're going to be in trial. We're going to be in court just about every day from here on out, and not just monitoring what's going on a video feed, but we'll be in there. It's interesting. You can catch a lot more when you're sitting in the courtroom than you do watching a video feed, and we do both. But this week, I think it's time to get in there and start covering this full time again. Sure.
And that's something we've done on and off throughout these months. But the good news is, now that we know that things are somewhat coming to I don't want to say an end, but one of the ends.
Right.
Yes, we will be not only covering this on the podcast as we get these kind of bigger updates, and especially once we get a verdict, but we'll also be covering this on 3TV and CBS 5 in our newscast for our television viewers too. That way everybody is up to speed on what's going on with this trial, because we know you guys have come with us now for a good part of a year on this trial, which is crazy. And so we want everybody to be just as up to speed as we are once we learn what's going on. So stick with us. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is the best place you're going to find everything that comes with the zombie hunter trial. And then as we do get a verdict, and as we continue through whatever that sentence is, we will be bringing on some of the top detectives and police investigators that worked on this case, who will be revealing some pretty crazy details they've never been able to reveal before, because this was waiting to stand trial. So that'll be an interesting thing to learn about after everything.
Yeah, you'd think that after the trial, everything is out there. But
no.
In a lot of these cases, there is more information that witnesses can't talk about until the trial's over, and we are going to get a lot of these witnesses to come talk to us. So this podcast, this story, is by no means nearing an end.
I would say not even close, based on just things that we know may be coming down the chute with what others have to say and reveal. So stay with us. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll be back soon with another Zombie Hunter trial update as it continues. True Crime Arizona, the podcast, is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney.
And me, Morgan Lowe. It is a production of 3TV, CBS 5, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is True Crime Arizona, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.